Lester, Wushu engineer. The Tonfer were invented by Thorin Oakenshield.
His armor rent, wielding nothing but an oaken branch as a shield.
That was a joke. Lighten up in the comments section below. You can go do your own research on the Tonfer's origin. I'm not going to address that much in this video. There are other channels that do a much better job of researching the history of various weapons. Just remember that if you decide to debate the Tonfer's origin amongst yourselves in the comments section below, do it in a good-natured fashion. I will insist on civility. What I will say is that although the Tonfer is heavily associated with Okinawan martial arts, both the Tonfer and its variants seem to have been in use in a number of different regions, and I even found within traditional Chinese martial arts weapon sets. Although, what isn't? Kung Fu practitioners seem to want to fight with everything, including small wooden benches, and possibly even the kitchen sink. I recently received a request on my nunchaku video from one of my viewers to investigate the Tonfer. As a matter of fact, I had intended to investigate the Tonfer some time ago, and even went to the trouble of building one to test with. The only problem was that what I built was... So here's the original Tonfer that I constructed. As you can see, it's pretty rubbish. It's pretty sturdy, it's sturdily constructed and everything. It's not going to go anywhere anytime soon, it's not going to break apart. But it just feels really awkward in the hand. It's like the weight distribution was just slightly off. I think it's possible that one of the problems was that because I used this heavy bolt here, I don't know, it just feels like the weight is like I can probably demonstrate it here. Like that's the balance point on this weapon. So the weight is predominantly towards the handle here. It just feels off. So this is what delayed my test of the Tonfer for some time. I needed to build myself proper Tonfer. So hence this project. So as you can see, what I originally had, I think the handle was also a little bit small. Handle was a bit small. This aluminium disc that I have here as the top part of the Tonfer, insert traditional name here, just didn't work for me. The length is fine. And this is also a hardwood. It's pretty sturdy, as I said, but it was just really awkward. Not what I wanted to use to do the testing. So I put the investigation off until I got the new comment, which spurred me on to build myself a proper pair of Tonfer. Thanks for your comment. Instead of launching right into the full exhaustive analysis of the Tonfer's striking potential, I decided to split the video up into two parts. The first video, this video, part 1, will show excerpts of the build process and some fun non-scientific tests with the Tonfer, the nunchaku and the flute. Part 2, which I will release at a later date, will showcase only the exhaustive scientific analysis of the Tonfer's striking potential, using our impulse block equipment and methodology. Based on some of the comments on my previous video, there seems to be a bit of a disconnect between my audience's appreciation of the analysis and the numbers that I provide and their appreciation of a weapon's effectiveness. So I decided to provide some more subjective testing of weapon effectiveness in this video, which is probably what most people are familiar with from looking at videos on YouTube. However, I also wanted to take the opportunity to discuss the limitations of this kind of subjective testing within the context of the fun tests that I performed in this video, but more on that later. So onto the build process. I decided to build the Tonfer out of some long seasoned wood harvested from a carbine, or also known as a Moreton Bay ash tree, that had to be felled 10 years ago when we built our house on our property. I dislike wastage of any kind. And this can lead me to exhibit hoarding behavior unless I am disciplined. So please don't look too closely at my workshop. When properly controlled, however, it can lead to efficient use of resources. In fact, I actually built our bed out of the same wood. And Wikipedia says that carbene was used in the past for building bridges. This I can believe because our bed weighs an actual metric ton and can probably survive a direct asteroid strike. That was a joke. Anyway, here are some video clips from the Tonfa build process. So these are some of the materials I'm going to be using to build the Tonfa. These pieces of wood, as you can see, I've cut from a large plank that is actually an indigenous hardwood, sometimes called carbene, also Moreton Bay ash, I believe. This was actually from a tree that unfortunately was on the site that we built our house about 8 or 9 years ago, and so unfortunately it had to be felled. But I didn't want to waste the wood, so I actually got a guy with a portable mill, I think it's called a Lucas mill, to come and mill the wood into timbers that we could then use. And so this has been sitting and seasoning in the sun, or drying out in the sun for quite some time, aging. It's a very hard and heavy wood. As one of the indigenous timbers that are actually quite resistant to termite attack. This and this type of wood and the ironbark variants, they're very hard, very heavy, and some of the locals say that the termites break their teeth on the wood. I wouldn't go that far, but it's quite resistant. And apparently it has been used traditionally by the Aboriginal people to make spears. So I think it's quite apt that I use this wood to make the Tonfa. One problem is that it is, as I said, very heavy, very sturdy wood. So these are going to be fairly heavy Tonfa. I'm in two minds about whether to keep the Tonfa a square cross section. I may do that just to simplify the build process. And of course that is one of the types of Tonfa that you can get. It's just a simple square profile, or at least this isn't exactly square, but it's pretty close profile. Or whether I should shape it out into a round, like a dowel type profile towards the tips. So I'm still going to have a think about that. And I think I may actually just opt to go with the heavier, simple square profile just to simplify the process. I've weighed these sections so far, and as they are right now, they're sitting at close to 700 grams just as they are, and that's not including the handle or anything else. So yeah, at the end of the day, if I leave them square profile, they're probably going to be around 800, 900 grams. So pretty hefty Tonfa. So a little bit of a change of plan. I have done a bit of shaping on these handles, and I decided not to go for the bolt straight through the body of the Tonfa and through the handle for a number of reasons, but primarily because I've reached the limit of what my drill press can do in terms of drilling a straight hole through hard wood like this. So I don't have access to a lathe, wood or otherwise, unfortunately. So I've got to do all of this kind of shaping by hand. If I had a lathe, it would probably be a lot easier to shape these these things, and also to actually get a hole down the center. But I don't, so I'm going to have to make do. So essentially what I'm going to do is more shaping on these handles, and then I'm going to use I'm going to sink a hole of a certain depth into the body of the Tonfer, set this in using either wood glue or epoxy, and to reinforce it further, I'm going to have a long wood screw from the other side of the Tonfer, just to reinforce the whole thing as well. So I think that's how I'm going to do it. So here we have the finished product, or at least finished to the point that I wanted to finish it to before I started having some fun with them, and in the follow-up video doing the full and complete testing using our impulse block methodology. There were a couple of problems with the construction of the handles. As I mentioned before, I don't have access to a lathe, so I've had to just do these by hand. So they're not identical; they're clearly handmade, mostly using the tender affections of an angle grinder. Anyway, they're functional. These end caps or knobs are not actually big enough to my liking, but they're functional. They'll do for now. At some later stage, I can opt to lop those off and replace them with bigger ones. I just didn't have I was limited by the thickness of the wood that I was using, this Moreton Bay ash. So I couldn't actually make them past a certain size if I was just going to be making them out of one single piece of wood. So I may do that, I may change it in future. Another problem I encountered while building them was that my drill bit wasn't long enough to drill an adequately sized pilot hole into the wood of the handles. So the wood screws I was going to be using are a little bit too long and sort of overshot that pilot hole. So at the point where they overshot, there was a danger of the handles splitting due to the pressure through the center of this round section. So I had to just stop screwing and cut them off. I then bunged them full of epoxy, which is not ideal, but these are recessed or set into this wooden block more than halfway into the wooden block, and epoxied in, hammered in as well. So they're not going to go anywhere. I'm actually quite fine with that construction. I have played around with them a little bit up to now, not a lot. They're still looking fairly pretty and sanded. I'm not going to varnish them with anything. I'm going to keep them native wood. I might at some stage put some oil on them, but I'm probably not going to do that now. So if we weigh them, hello, wakey wakey, you'll see that there's a slight disparity between the two. So the one weighs 732 grams, and the other weighs 747. So out by a few grams. It's not going to make a world of a difference. So I'm reasonably happy with them. I may at some stage decide to, as you can see, I remained with a square or rough, well, not square, but sort of a rectangular profile for the Tonfer, just for now. At some stage in the future, I may opt to shape them by, first of all, putting grinding down the edges, and then smoothing it into a round cross section in the front and at the body of the Tonfer. But I may opt to just leave them like this in perpetuity. But these will certainly do for the testing that we're going to be doing. Once I had built the Tonfer,
I decided to put them through some informal tests. Firstly, I introduced them to our iron dummy, also known as Commander Vimes, also known as the Iron Policeman. The Tonfer stood up quite well to the use against the iron dummy and didn't actually display even a scratch or a dent. I then did some strikes against some hanging coconuts using the Tonfer, the nunchaku, and the flute.
You might be able to see that it's well and truly cracked here with one strike. So we'll just finish the job. Pretty gruesome. Wouldn't want to be a coconut. Decapitation. That's quite interesting. We're going to be harvesting and using the coconut that hasn't actually touched the ground. We're going to eat it, so I hate wasting things. Very nasty. Again, not a good day to be a coconut.
And this is a good opportunity to talk about subjective tests such as these. I'm sure that someone out there would look at the nunchaku's decapitation of the coconut and conclude that its performance was objectively better than that of the flute, because it looked way cooler. In addition, that same person may look at the Tonfer's performance and say that it was objectively the worst performer of the three, because even though it totally shattered the coconut in a single strike, it didn't look quite as cool. However, these conclusions are not objective at all, because they're based on subjective evaluations of how something looks. Coconuts and other targets can only provide very limited data on how weapons perform. Natural variations, such as that found amongst coconuts for instance, can lead to erroneous conclusions. On a side note, I never thought back in my early days that I'd be here approaching 50 and talking about natural variation in coconuts. Life is strange that way, I suppose. Anyway, you'll note that the coconut I used for the Tonfer test was significantly bigger and subjectively tougher by my estimation than the coconuts I used in the other two weapon tests. I did this purposely to illustrate the effect that natural variation has on perceived weapon performance. I repeated the Tonfer test using a smaller coconut, similar to those used in the other two weapon tests, and this is what that test looked like. As you can see from the test, it looked significantly more impressive due to the slightly more fragile coconut. In addition, for tests like these, in which all three weapons easily shattered the coconut with one strike, it's a stretch to conclude that one outperformed the others. Barring the conclusion that I can crack coconuts with one strike using all three weapons, we can't really conclude much else. There is insufficient data to draw any real conclusions about the differences in performance between the three weapons. And this highlights the importance of proper subjective analysis that yields numerical or graphical data that can be easily compared and evaluated. So, although my videos showing graphs and lists of numbers are nowhere near as compelling or exciting as exploding coconuts, they yield far more useful data, allowing a far more objective evaluation of human performance. I say far more, and I don't say perfectly, because no testing procedure, no methodology, and no equipment is without error and without limitation. So bear that in mind. But it is still far more objective than smashing coconuts, for instance. The Wushu scientist and I decided to do a bit of light weapon sparring using the Tonfer and against a gwun or pole. I prefer doing freestyle sparring in demonstrations rather than elaborate pre-practiced choreographs, because I feel it is a better demonstration of natural instinctive fighting movements. So in all cases, these clips represent freestyle sparring, which we did not prepare beforehand in any way. Note that because both weapons used in these light sparring sessions are quite capable of causing grievous injury, and despite the fact that we both wore padded gambesons during the sparring, we still had to be extremely careful. Hands, legs, and heads were still exposed, and both weapons are still capable of breaking bones through padded gambesons. So we had to slow things down considerably and be quite cautious and controlled with striking. So bear that in mind. As you can see from the footage, I am at quite a range disadvantage with the Tonfer against the gwun. So I have to be quite defensive at first and engineer an entry strategy using the weapon's defensive capabilities. I would say that with opponents of matching skill, the weapon with greater range will typically have an advantage over weapons with reduced range. Of course, this dynamic may change depending on the environment. For instance, within very cramped confines or in heavily wooded areas. The Tonfer have clearly been designed or co-opted to fill a particular niche, offering pretty robust close-range defense and offense, along with some mid-range attack and defense options. I would consider them a tool that can be used to enhance bare-hand combat because they can easily be leveraged to become an extension of bare-hand block, deflection, and striking techniques. Of course, parrying, deflecting, and controlling, as well as short-range attack and defense, are also entirely possible with simpler, more conventional weapons such as the flute or the stick. However, the Tonfer are traditionally used as a matched pair, offering somewhat enhanced defense over a single weapon. The Tonfer are quite short though, severely limiting their effective range. I've always liked the Tonfer and their derivatives, and my feelings have not changed since building this new set for myself. So what about the potential evolution of the Tonfer design? As many of my viewers will know, I really enjoy reimagining and redesigning weapons from the past for a more modern setting using modern materials, modern technology, and modern design techniques. Did I hear someone say bladed Tonfer? I hope not. Despite the fact that I really enjoy watching Del Toro's Hellboy movies, I'm not a fan of the bladed Tonfer design. Because the rotation of the Tonfer brings it into close proximity to the wielder's body, the arm or torso, a blade or even a set of spear points might make it a little bit too dangerous for the wielder. I realize that the prop crew sort of thought about that in keeping the edge axis at right angles to the plane of rotation, but still, would you want that thing swinging so close to your arm and torso? In addition, although the Tonfer can certainly be used to offend, I believe that the weapon and the weapon set itself is more strongly weighted towards defense. As such, I think that a possible avenue of development might be to dial the defensive potential up, possibly dial the offensive potential down by making the Tonfer flat and shield-like. A little bit like semicircles with a single straight edge and the Tonfer grip located near the top of the straight edge. You'll notice from the sketch that I included a cutout section, similar to that seen in some Maori war clubs. I think that this cutout could be of use for momentarily catching and controlling weapons, perhaps even catching and breaking certain weapons under certain conditions. The materials used to construct these Tonfer should be carefully selected to ensure that the Tonfer remain light enough to be usable, but strong enough to be used as a shield. They would possibly best be constructed of composite laminate sheets, perhaps incorporating some thin metallic plates for added robustness, perhaps layers of Kevlar, carbon fiber, maybe even glass fiber. If it were not for certain restrictions in Australia in terms of the ownership of certain items, I would be interested in constructing a pair from laminate sheets that have been rated for ballistic threats. These would provide some added shield type defense against certain types of ballistic threat. I think that would be particularly cool reimagining of the traditional Tonfer. Let me know in the comments if you want me to put that on my list of potential future projects.
So we're going to, in the follow-up video to this one, we're going to be doing the full and complete testing of the Tonfer against our impulse block setup. So that will allow us to process the data from our load cell and also from the microsecond timer to extrapolate data such as, or extrapolate values associated with the strike that include impulse, projected force, projected maximum force, impact force, things like kinetic energy, power, and of course impact velocity. So a whole bunch of things that would be of interest to those who want a more full and complete analysis of what a Tonfer strike is like. And as a point of comparison, just for comparative purposes. We're also going to be retesting the nunchaku and the flute, and we're going to use side strikes in all 3 cases against the impulse block. So if you're interested in seeing that analysis, I encourage you to tune in when the following video comes out, Tonfa Part 2, and we'll have a look at that. Now, of course, that kind of data processing, actually getting the data from the load cell and doing the various calculations and numerical analysis to pull that data out is it is time consuming. So we are going to be limiting it to only one type of strike per weapon, and as I said, we're going to be using that side strike, similar to the strikes that I used when I was breaking coconuts in the fun tests I did in this video. So although we can look at other types of strikes with these weapons, as I said, it's quite time consuming to pull all of that data together. So if you want to see other tests done with these particular weapons, leave comments in the comment section below, but do understand that each of these tests is quite time consuming to perform in terms of the data analysis. So we can't do more than one type per video. So anyway, if you're looking forward to that, as I said, stay tuned for the next video, and I'll see you all again next time. Cheers.